Good afternoon. Tea is the art of preparation, patience, and presence. What we practice in liquid joy spills over into every single area of our lives. Today, as we sit and we gather in beloved community with those joining us tonight, good evening, my friends. And to those of you who are joining us online, tea calls us into community. It calls us to even experience divinity. And tonight, as we sit with our special guests, the Friends of Scarrett Bennett College, and those around the table, I'll remind you of 3 quick reasons why we tea. I mentioned first that tea is the art of preparation, for it is the process of preparing the vessel, the water, the cup, the leaves. It is the art of patience. It is placing the leaf in the bag, in the cup. It is pouring the water over the leaves, and it is sitting. And it is sitting some more. And patience even means that sometimes we take a deliberate whiff with me, guests, like, and we're waiting for the tea to steep patiently. And then it is presence, where we sit and we say, good evening, I see you. Good evening. I'm glad you're here. Good evening. So glad to connect with you again. Good evening. Thank you for inviting me. And good evening. Thank you for being our special guest. It is with the art of preparation, patience, and presence that we join for our community and hospitality with our beloved Honorable Mayor, Eugene Gus Newport, and our Executive Director, Reverend Sandrea Tolbert, who will lead us in this beautiful conversations. Now, sit back, take a sip, enjoy your tea, and let's have a talk about what hospitality and community is all about. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Dr. Janet Walls from TT and Company. We are sipping on special blends from TT and Company tonight. Thank you, Dr. Walsh. Dr. Walsh is the founder of TT and Company. She is our host tonight. We are actually carrying HospitaliTEA here at Scarrett Bennett Blends. We're actually carrying those right here at Scarrett now.
Yes.
So you can come to the Lasky gift shop and get some. Our friends that are joining us live tonight are actually in the room and sipping on hibiscus tea, peppermint tea, vitality, jasmine tea, very special tea. And so we're just excited to have this here, right here at Scarrett Bennett. And we are so glad to have the Honorable Gus Newport with us. Gus served as our keynote on Saturday for our inaugural Radical Change banquet, in which we honored several radical change agents here in the community. Here in the community. And so many people were blown away by Gus remarks on Saturday night that they were blowing his phone up and wanted to have further conversations with him. And so we were like, okay, this is the perfect opportunity to have conversations with Gus and the Honorable Gus Newport. I mean, I'm just so humbled that you come this way and that you actually are sitting in the historic Bennett social rooms right now, right here at historic Scarrett Bennett Center. So we wanted to welcome you once more again, Gus, because it was like the words that you spoke on Saturday, everybody was begging for more. Begging for more. So for those who do not know, I'm just going to give a quick, shall we say, rap sheet, if you will, of Gus, so that you all will know who is indeed in our midst. Those are our friends who want to make sure that we were going to be Facebook Live and YouTube Live tonight. We got all kinds of emails to say, "Is this going to be streamed? We want to be." Well, I'm in. I think the lady was in Wisconsin, so we got all types of emails about wanting to make sure that this conversation was live, so that they could have, even though they may be watching virtual, they want to be a part. So for those that do not know, I'll just read quickly that from the early days as a civil rights activist, right alongside Malcolm X, to his current role as a community economic development consultant, Gus Newport has always been a champion for the people, helping to frame the nature of grassroots community organizing to benefit the underserved. Among his many notable distinctions are his roots in the civil rights movement, where he befriended Malcolm X and Adam Clay Powell. We're going to talk some about that tonight. And helped found the Organization of African American Unity in 1964, right before Malcolm X was assassinated in 1965. After serving as mayor of the city of Berkeley for 7 years, wow, I'm trying to make it one. Gus became director of the Dudley Street neighborhood initiative project in Boston, the very first example of an impoverished community taking back their very own neighborhood. Under Gus's direction, the Dudley Center Neighborhood Initiative was able to purchase large properties using eminent domain, allowing local residents to buy homes at affordable costs. You may have some insight for us right here in Nashville with our current affordable housing issues. We're going to get to that. The program, which has been ongoing in Boston since 1984, laid the groundwork, if you will, for what is possible when neighborhoods come together and that they're run by the people for the people. Gus has continued to serve on numerous governmental and nonprofit agencies, including the advisory board to the New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina. And he's been a faculty on higher education in institutions such as Yale, MIT, and the University of California, and has been a member of the UN delegations advocating for peace and justice. A father of two and a resident of Berkeley. His most recently, Gus has been on the leadership committee for the National Council of Elders, an organization comprised solely of people over, we're not going to tell your age, 65. Each of whom played a pivotal role in the social justice movements in the 20th century, including civil rights, women's rights, environmental rights, farm workers' rights, and the gay and lesbian rights. So we are so ecstatic this afternoon that we have sitting in conversation with us today the Honorable Gus Newport. Let us give Gus a round of applause. Well, Gus, I'm really just going to throw out a couple of conversation pieces of questions that we actually received some across. You know, when people found out that you were going to be here, they started sending in questions that they wanted us to make sure that we threw at you that they were burning to know, as well as there are several people in the audience that most certainly want to have an opportunity to be in conversation with you as well. So I think I really want to pick back on something that you really said Saturday night that really kind of resonated, especially with me being as the executive director here at Scarrett Bennett Center. You spoke at the banquet and you spoke about the important role that your grandmother played in your life, and you mentioned several other women. And so we want to we want to see how you view um, your role with women in your life, how they played a part in cultivating your leadership style. Because you lifted up your grandmother, you lifted up your daughter, you lifted up several women. And so we really want to know, or let me just say, I really want to know how you've used the positions of power and influence to bolster women in your life. Not you have women in your life, and how do you bolster the influence of that with how you deal with women in leadership?
Wow. I always say, if not for the women that I had very early in my life, I would not be who or what I am. On my bedroom wall, I have a large blown up picture of my mother on the wall. And to the right, I have a large blown up picture of my grandmother with her husband and my mother sitting on her lap. So that means that when I go to bed at night, they're the last people I see. And when I wake up in the morning, they're the first people I see. My grandmother started taking me on a journey that was unbelievable. But you have to understand first from whence she came. My grandmother grew up in Martinsville, Virginia. And in the fourth grade, she went to school late one day after picking cotton. And she walked into the classroom and a white teacher slapped her without even asking a question. My grandmother walked out of school, never went back, but she became an avid reader. In those days, they got married very young. She was 16, her husband was 18. They had their little wedding, thought they were going on their honeymoon, taking their presents, and they're driving, and get arrested by the Ku Klux Klan and the local police, who took their presents and threw them in jail. When they came out of that, then her husband got injured in a mine accident in West Virginia. And so by the time she had my mother was 2, my grandmother decided to pick up and move from Virginia to Pittsburgh, where she had cousins. And then from Pittsburgh, she moved to Rochester, New York, where she had a half sister. And I was born in Rochester. At the age of 5, my grandmother started taking me to see Paul Robeson and Marian Anderson. And she used to take me to all the women's groups, the church groups, etc., and whatever else. And she was a very quiet woman, but she always was showing love. I always remember when spring came, she'd be on her knees digging up the ground and planting tulips and this and that. She believed so much in the environment and things like that. And so as time went on, it was really interesting watching all she did from a beloved community standpoint. We lived in a poor neighborhood, naturally. At that time, in a city of 400,000, only 8,000 were blacks, many who had moved from the South seeking a better life. But Rochester was also the home of the Underground Railroad. So people went right from there up to Canada and whatever else. And it has quite a history. Frederick Douglass and Stanton both lived in Rochester, in places like that. But it was just always a maze. The vision my grandmother had. When we moved in this real poor neighborhood, a lot of single white female teachers started moving in because it was affordable housing. Every time one moved in, my grandmother would host a reception with the whole neighborhood. Food, music, understanding. And she'd have us young kids begin calling these teachers by Aunt Joan, Aunt Jean from the Southern perspective, and this and that. That kind of love. Time goes on. And she begins, I remember they taught me how to iron and how to sew and things like that. We had one of those rolling irons. I used to, in those days, because she worked cleaning white folks' home, used to iron everything, sheets, pillowcases, you name it. And I always had to do that. And they always oversaw. I also had to clean a coal furnace, get all them ashes out and clear them up and snap. We used to plant fruit trees in the backyard and can the fruit with paraffin jars and all that stuff. Men, boys, women, all together. There was no difference of things, you know, from that thing that said that we as men were supposed to call the shots of control. And I'll never forget when my grandmother saw me, you know, finish. I was the first one in my family to finish high school, much less anything else. Then I got a scholarship to college. It was funny, even in New York State, far up north, in order to be college bound, you had to go through what they call New York Regents. Black people could not take Regents courses in New York State until after 1956. But my homeroom teacher, who was white, graduated from Heidelberg University in Tiffin, Ohio, said, "You got a brilliant mind," and got me a scholarship there for both football and athletics, and I went on there and went to school. I come back out, and I get drafted in the military. I get stationed in Heidelberg, Germany. I was in intelligence. They tried to get me to go to Officers Candidate School. I said, no, I'm not going to nothing, because they said I'd have to be in 3 years more. I didn't aspire to this in the first place. I want to get out of it as soon as I can. So I did, and I come back and go back. This is in 1960. And the civil rights movement is in full sway in Rochester. And my grandmother is observing everything I'm doing. I'm put in charge of the biggest civil rights organization in Rochester. And police brutality was rampant. I mean, young black men were just getting arrested and busted all the time. And so the police invaded the black Muslim mosque. And Daisy Bates, who some people remember integrated she and her husband schools in Little Rock, Arkansas, was in Rochester organizing for the NAACP. Malcolm, who knew Daisy, called Daisy and said, "Daisy, I got to come to Rochester. Who should I be in touch with?" She said, "Gus Newport." So Malcolm calls me, and I'm just taken aback. For 2 hours we talked. He was living in New York, downstate, I would live upstate. Talked every night for 2 hours, and then he flew into Rochester on a very cold winter's day in February. Rochester, New York is cold.
Period.
I remember when I was a kid going to school, we had 148 inches of snow one winter. Schools were closed for 2 weeks. Snow was all up over the doors and stuff. Malcolm flies in, and the planes used to land on the tarmac in those days, and the stairs would come down, and you'd walk from the outside into the airport. And I'm standing inside this airport surrounded by all these white men in white shirts and ties and felt hats and overcoats. And I'm thinking this is all businessmen getting ready to take a trip down to New York or someplace. Malcolm walked in, we had never seen each other. He said, "Who is Gus Newport? Who's Brother Eugene?" I said, "I am, sir." He said, "Youngblood, you got the best tap telephone in America. This is all FBI here." I said, "Oh, Lord."
Wow.
So the media and everybody was there, and they started talking and laughing and discussing, and the FBI was caught off guard. They didn't know what to do. Malcolm said, "I know you're FBI," and they had to admit it. So we had this long talk, the media covering that. Then Malcolm said, "All right, let's get out of here." So we went down to the jailhouse. We went first to meet with the sheriff. And Malcolm compared his Eastern Star ring along with this guy's to get him level. And then he got inside his head, took us down to the jail, and we took the 8 brothers who had been arrested up to the court and got them freed. Then we took them to a friend's house and fed them because they'd only been drinking warm milk. Because as a Muslim, they wouldn't dare eat anything in court because they'd eat no hog, no pork. After that, we went to Baden Street Settlement House in Rochester, New York, a nonprofit organization where there were about 500 or 600 people having a community meeting. And Malcolm walks in, and the place just goes crazy. They just all jump up and cheer. But the Christian ministers started saying, "We can't let him speak. He's not one of us."
Oh, wow.
By the time the community got through with him, though, the ministers knew who was going to speak. Malcolm gave one of the most brilliant speeches I had ever heard. And he started off by saying, "Brother ministers, We're all black. We got the same set of problems. We got no business talking about our differences. Let's talk about where it is we want to go and how we want to go about it. And that's how I came to know Malcolm X. He came back several times to meet about things. And because I was a friend of Malcolm X, I couldn't hold a job in Rochester. Finally, I moved down to New York, went to work for IBM because I'd learned punch machines and mainframe computers when I was in the Army. And I went to work for IBM and How You Act. But the good fortune of that is because Malcolm was there and Adam Clayton Powell. Adam Clayton Powell and Malcolm X were just like this. They both became my mentors. Adam Clayton Powell used to come home, you know, he was both the head of Abyssinian Church and the congressman from Harlem. He'd come home on Fridays, and Malcolm used to have these big old, like, boxing rings right at the corner of 125th and I forget the name of the street, right near the Teresa Hotel. And there he'd be giving, we call corner speeches. Well, Adam Clayton Powell would drive in from Washington in his chauffeur car, double park, get right up there and he, Malcolm, would be talking to the crowds about everything. What we should aspire to, what this country is and what it should become, what a beloved community is and all those things, etc., whatever else. Fast forward, things go on. John F. Kennedy gets assassinated. Malcolm gets interviewed by the newspapers, and he said, the chickens are coming home to roost. The news media misinterpreted what he was saying. He was saying, because John F. Kennedy was running for re-election, and he was working with both the Nation of Islam and the Ku Klux Klan, who both wanted separate parts of the country in Georgia someplace to get more votes. And Malcolm said, I'm a black nationalist, but I never aspired to separatism. I'm not going to do something with the Ku Klux Klan or whatever else. And of course, Elijah Muhammad didn't set him down supposedly for 90 days. 90 days came and went. They did not put him back into the Nation of Islam. So then he created Muslim Mosque Incorporated. That didn't go too far. And then he said, I want to create the Organization of Afro-American Unity, and invited me, Philip Randolph, and several other people to help him form the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And that was to talk about what we, as black people and people in general, have to do to make this a more livable society, etc., whatever else. His house was firebombed in Queens. And he called me. He'd been invited to go to Rochester to speak at Colgate Divinity School to talk about what Islam really was. Because he'd been put on the International Board of Islam in Geneva, Switzerland. And he also was asked to speak at Cornhill Methodist Church, where they filmed this talk. Sorry to say, the minister who invited there gave the film to his secretary, and that film was lost. And I'm still asking for it because I was working with a couple of people trying to do a film on Malcolm a couple of years ago. But the guy who wanted to do it was from the Nation of Islam, and all he wanted to talk about was the trial. I wanted to talk about the changes that Malcolm had gone through. Because history says that Malcolm and Martin only met once. That's a lie. Malcolm and Martin conversed often. As a matter of fact, 35 days before he was assassinated, we were meeting at Sidney Poitier's mansion in Westchester. Juanita Poitier, his first wife, was hosting the meeting. A. Philip Randolph, Ozzie Davis, Ruby Dee were there, Malcolm, a couple of Muslims. Martin Luther King was on the phone because he had been arrested once again demonstrating in Florida. And it was really funny because Malcolm could be comical too. So Juanita Poitier said, Malcolm, I thought you were going to stop calling white people devils. Malcolm told us a little story about he had been in a debate in Oxford in Britain with their greatest scholar. And after 30 minutes, the scholar stopped because Malcolm was whipping him. He said, wait a minute, Malcolm, I got to ask you a question. I thought you were going to stop calling white people devils. Malcolm hesitated for about a minute. He said, yeah, I am, but then who's going to replace you? And the whole place just started laughing. So we went on that. Then Malcolm went to meet the heads of states in Africa, Nehru and all kinds of people, to find out more about the international scene, what they were going through, etc. And here we are sitting in this house. So Juanita said, all right, Malcolm, you're going to stop calling white people devils because look at you. You got green eyes and red hair because Malcolm's mother was half white. And he said, you're right. It was agreed that Malcolm was going to go before the United Nations to file a suit against American hegemony, imperialism, and colonialism. And Martin Luther King said, and I'll be there to second it. That phone call was wiretapped by J. Edgar Hoover. Who, when we were trying to get information for the film, we got a hold of that through the New York Police Department. And he said, these are the two most dangerous black men in the world. 35 days later, Malcolm X is dead. Now, for a long time, people thought the Nation of Islam was what killed him. If you follow the news, most recently, you see where the New York police admitted that it was the New York police and the FBI that did this. And of course, years later, as I'm going to work for the Department of Labor and other places, and I was assigned to Puerto Rico to do economic development and stuff, it took 2 years before I got clearance. And I was getting calls from people all over the country saying, the FBI is still checking on you to see what's going on, what you're all about. So I happened to come home to Rochester because I always came home on the weekends because my mother and grandmother loved me to come home and cook for them. And I went to the FBI because I used to play basketball with some of these fellows. I said, hey, y'all calling all over the country about me. What's the questions? Well, Gus, you know you were very close to Malcolm X. I said, yes, I was, as I should have been. And you know, your mother joined the Communist Party. I said, well, I didn't know that, but let me go and find out because she's very much in the Baptist church. So I went home and I said, Mama, what happened? She said, well, when those 3 boys got killed in Mississippi, Shane and Miss them, I went to the NAACP to see what they were going to do about it. They weren't doing anything. Urban League wasn't. So the head of the Communist Party, who was a black man who was an engineer, was doing some real things. And so he asked me to join him, and I did for a while. She said, now, boy, she said, your daddy almost died because your daddy was an Abe Lincoln Republican. But my grandmother didn't get mad one bit. And I never found out till later. My grandmother told me the story about her mother being a slave. Her mother was a slave in Virginia and was blinded by the plantation boss. And even with all that kinds of stuff against her, she practiced the beloved community, inviting everybody, white, this and that, to make a better world, society, and this and that. But she always watched over me. You know, we even said, when my grandmother died, that she lived long enough till she felt my mother was strong enough to take the family on. We absolutely believe that. That's the way her life was played out. And I remember telling that story about my great-grandmother being a slave and this and that. And my mother said after I spoke, gave the eulogy and this and that, before we went into break bread and have dinner, my mother said, come on, boy, come in this side room and tell me about, I didn't know my grandmother was a slave, and I told her. And as I told the whole story, my grandmother's smile came over her face. I said, what you smiling about, Mama? She said, now I understand why my mom always had a shotgun up over the kitchen door in Virginia. And so it's just stories and things like that, knowing what it takes to survive, etc., and all those things and whatever else.
So it sounds like that you learned beloved community from them, from the important roles that the women in your life played, all down to also knowing how to cultivate the land.
Yes.
To also be an integral part that the land
to canning fruits,
to canning fruits,
ironing,
to ironing to
knit and
the
crochet also.
So and so that also helps with allowing people to understand how communities can take care of communities.
Yes, ma'am.
That we can be self-sufficient and taking care of our own. I'm gonna switch gears a minute. Someone submitted this question. And let's see if I can give it justice. What do you see are some of the pressing justice issues that we are facing at this moment?
Well, one thing from depths of study and constantly hearing over and over again from the media and whatever else about this so-called democracy we live in, I've come to recognize we've never been a democracy. The Constitution is not worth the paper that it's written on. But most Americans are so ill-educated that they don't understand that. We are 43rd in the world in literacy and education, we Americans, 72nd in healthcare. Bob Moses, who some of you may remember, who was part of Freedom Summer and whatever else, the person that Danny Glover, the actor and actress, and I worked very closely with. I chaired Bob Moses' Algebra Project Board. And Bob Moses, we went to see Bob a little over a year ago, just before he died. And he was working in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And he got the school system down there to begin to look at our education system. Because most people don't know it. Do you know that an education is not a constitutional right in the Constitution of the United States to this day? It was taken up in the Congress in the 50s by the president of Harvard, and it never got out of committee. Education is not a constitutional right. Bob Moses, we went on a tour around the country talking about that back in the 90s. And as we told people this, they just couldn't believe it. But you know, the problem about Americans, we're so misguided. We hear something, or we listen to the media, and the media is corrupt as anything, because capitalism has so controlled them to keep them going, etc., whatever else. It's hard to get at the truth. But what Bob did in this Fort Lauderdale county, he said to the school department, said, look, we know we're not a democracy. He said, if anything, we here in the United States are a caste system. And they said, oh my God, so this department is looking at it. Well, 2 weeks later, I went back to California, and I'm looking at a news media program, and there were some people from India, highly educated, who work in Silicon Valley. I mean, PhDs, et cetera, whatever else. And they were saying, you know, we came to America to escape the caste system. We came to America and found the caste system. Now remember, we talk about nonviolence and things now. Where do we get it from? Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi said, you've got to practice nonviolence because the country, the first in the world to drop the atomic bomb that killed how many millions of people, no telling what it would do to its own people, so that the white racists, rednecks, could just manifest and maintain society as they came here and brought it. Because right now, I mean, I'm running all over. Just earlier today when I came in here, I was on a Zoom call with people that Danny Glover and I helped to do a film with about an indigenous population of a young woman who grew up on a native reservation. Her parents got separated. She moved to Portland, Oregon, sort of upscale white community. Her father had taught her to play basketball at the age of 9. She went and led a small women's college in Illinois to the National Women's Basketball Championship. They tried to get her to go into the WNBA. Jackie McCormick is her name. She said, no, I'm going to law school. I want to go back and help create programs to upgrade the reservations. Because very few people know that the amount of suicide and the number of alcoholism on those reservations is so high that death is just imminent. We don't know there's over 3,000 tribes right now in this country that are still on the books. Because even though we got the Bureau of Indian Affairs within our government, it doesn't do anything for them. Apartheid didn't start in South Africa. Apartheid started right here on the indigenous people. You know, we keep talking about Columbus founded America, this and that, et cetera. What do you think about these people that were there before that? So it's getting to the bottom, to the truth in this net. And of course, going back to my grandmother, you know, her father being indigenous and whatever else, to learn these things. But it's what led me to learn all these things, and I was lucky enough to have hands-on assistance with education, et cetera, whatever. Now, don't get me wrong, I had a lot of problems in school. Because my family, none of my parents or grandparents had ever finished school. So even when I first went to college, I was not ready. I mean, I dropped out, I went back, then I got drafted in the military, and then after I came out, this and that, did quite good. As a matter of fact, California used parts of my story to write the curriculum for California. And I hear people all the time aspire about this and that. I've been a senior fellow at MIT, Yale, UC Santa Cruz, places like that. I've got 2 honorary doctorates, this and that. But it was not necessarily what I got from the academic institutions themselves. It's the exposure that I got from people on the ground, my grandmother, my mother, and people like that, etc., Malcolm X, etc. And I'll tell you, although they painted Malcolm, as absolutely anti-white, when we used to go in restaurants, everybody, the white restaurant workers, Asian, they used to run to this table because Malcolm would include everybody in the discussion. And although he died broke, he was a great tipper too. So it was really something to see. And people used to say, well, Malcolm, why are you letting everybody be a part of this discussion? He said, I'm not anti-white, I'm pro-black. But I want to create a common agenda where white folks and black folks can come to a common table and create a common agenda, not one that was created by you for us, that manifests. And what's happening now? I just remember I was here in July, and I met with Tuck, one of the ministers here. Mm-hmm. And Damien took me over there. And Tuck said to me, he said, Gus, so good to see you. I know you was in the civil rights movement. He said, have you ever stopped to think what it was like just before the Civil War? I said, no, I hadn't thought about that. He said, that's what this country is right now. The divisions is just like it was just before the Civil War. And they're doing everything to maintain separation. First of all, they're claiming that people of color are going to take over. Then Trump had nerve enough to talk about COVID came from China. So we got people attacking the Asian people, et cetera, whatever else. And it's a shame because out in California, it's something terrible the way older Asians are getting attacked in the streets and things like that, whatever else. It's like all the divisions that we've got going now. I mean, supposedly that we're going to surpass them because we got more people. Well, I don't know about that or whatever else. And I'm not going to get into that. But all the differences now, the attacks against LGBTQ, the gay and straight and this and that, transgender and all that kind of stuff. It's war against people, God's children. And the Archbishop of Canterbury came to New Orleans right after Katrina. My brother over there, he was there. We were working together. He just reminded me, we worked together with Bishop Charles. And I was asked to be the keynote speaker. And I'm up there before the thing, and there've been some little divisions between the gay and straight priests within the Episcopalian Church. And I started up with saying, I'm not that much of a Bible expert or nothing, but I thought that God loved all God's children. Mm-hmm. Why are these divides? Why are you all practicing this and whatever else? And some of them stood up and said, Lord, look at here, this, that. But the beloved community is a term that Martin Luther King brought us, and as I said, Mahatma Gandhi said that's the way we have to go, et cetera, whatever else. And we've got to learn practice that. But when Janet Marsh first brought me over here to Scarrett, I had not yet known anything about it until she brought me the book. And I'm looking at the book, recognizing how Scarrett was founded. Scarrett was founded to practice and do all the things beloved community is all about. Has it reached that level? Have they, blacks and participants and other people, been allowed to play the role that they are or something else, or is there still divides, et cetera, whatever else? But as God would have it, we will get there. Mm-hmm. And thank God we got this wonderful woman here now who is our leader, et cetera, whatever else. And so it's been a privilege for me to come back here. Like I say, I keep telling Janet Walsh, I tell people all the time, I'm just an old country boy. What I know, I ain't that smart. I mean, I'm glad to be here.
Oh, you know plenty. That's why we're all sitting here and like hanging on your every word. I'm gonna ask one more question, then I'm gonna open it up for the rest of the crew because they're like dying to ask questions. I see it all over everybody's face. What model of organizing? You mentioned nonviolent movement. You mentioned the practice of beloved community. But what model of organizing do you feel is best for the current political state that we're in, political climate that we're in?
I'll tell you what, a lot of the divides are based on the state of the economy right now. I mean, interest rates are going up. Gasoline in California is almost $8 a gallon, if you can believe that.
Oh my.
Can you imagine just a few weeks ago we were talking about you couldn't find formula food for babies. In this country with all its resources and things like that? And so it's still, the capitalists in total control of the Congress, and everything else. And I never aspired to be a politician. I was drafted. But I started not to run for election the first time, but people begged me to, and in my second term, I knew I wasn't going to do it again. But one of the things that got me was the neoliberals, the role they played, who claimed to be so good, but they didn't want to see affordable housing burnt in certain places. And we were getting money from the federal government. And I said, let's make a scattered site up in the hills, even where wealthy live and whatever else. No, you can't have them people living up there. I said, what the hell you mean we can't have them up there? If their quality of life is raised and they can go to the better schools, then why can't they side by side? They just can't live with them wealthy people. So that's when I got out of politics. But I was invited to Boston to be the first senior fellow at the William Monroe Trotter Institute. Trotter was a civil rights activist. It was right there with W. Du Bois and some of them, but they don't write much about him because he really hammered at the establishment. He had a newspaper of his own. And I taught a course in alternative economics and public policy, teaching blacks how to create legislation, et cetera, whatever else. I got invited to a program that became the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, the Dudley Street in Boston. The way it started, a newspaper reporter, a black one, and an architect put an initiative on the ballot one time, wanted that part of Boston to secede from Boston, because Boston is a very racist place too. Got more colleges and universities than any city in the world. But they were going to name this new area Mandela. And that so embarrassed the mayor and the local leadership. They said, we got to do something. So they came to my course and they invited me down there on weekends. And they wanted to do a land trust because it was Mahatma Gandhi who first suggested land trusts for people who were victims of the caste system to assist with housing in India and this and that. So there was something on the books that had gone back to the 1800s that said if a community could create a master plan for rebuilding its neighborhood, they could get eminent domain authority. Eminent domain, which is usually reserved only for elected officials.
For the government.
We got some people to help us, and what we did is we identified first the kinds of things the community didn't like, and after that we decided to look at the kind of things they did like. Now, what we did is we got a lot of graduate students from MIT, Harvard, Yale, to go door to door with a lot of women, because in poor communities, 72% of heads of households are single women, usually 2 or 3 children, since the Vietnam and Korean War. Because when those boys came back from the Vietnam and Korean War, they were strung out PTSD, strung out on all kinds of drugs, et cetera, whatever else. But of course, mental health is not anything this country really practices. I remember when we were in New Orleans after Katrina, I called the Department of Mental Health to see if we could get some workers down there to help us, because people were walking on the street, they'd lost everything. Danny Glover used to come down 2 or 3 times a week, just walk the street, and people recognized that Danny would hug them. And they said, oh my God, you made my day. And I'm saying, look, why can't we get some mental health workers? It's things like that. So what we did, we created this master plan. We started out, there was a lot of illegal dumping in vacant lots in this neighborhood. And the people said, we want to get rid of that. So the city wrote new legislation. They provided us with trucks and equipment. And on the weekends, we'd pick up all that stuff. And then at the end of the day, we'd have music and ribs and dancing and whatever else. And we celebrate that, because organizing is short term and long term. After that, we went to flower shops and got flower seeds and planted flowers. So where there was blight, there becomes beauty. That's the spiritual part of it. And then we began looking at the kinds of housing, the kinds of businesses, et cetera, and everything else. Because you can't just build affordable housing. You've got to have the kinds of small businesses that are necessary, because most people go out to Walmart, these big chain stores, to get their stuff that's outside of our communities. But we should be able to buy for the same price. So we just started creating small business co-ops. And so that they could buy goods in large numbers and sell at the same price as these people going for over there. We had young people and older people put on skits to show what was like, what we didn't have in our community, whatever else, that began to inform everybody. And there were a variety of different churches, but they all worked together. We didn't get pictures, about differences in Islam and Christianity and all this. Everybody was working together. And that was how we came up with the greatest master plan. And to this day, that program is the only nonprofit community organization in the history of the United States to get eminent domain authority. And I've asked the question over and over again when I go places, why can't you do it here? Well, the politicians who are corrupted by the capitalists make sure that the legislation doesn't permit that or stuff, whatever else. I'm going to be on a Zoom tomorrow, right from here, to Marin County, which is one of the wealthiest counties in California. They've asked me to facilitate it because they've got proposals from 4 people who claim to come in. They're going to help develop a community land trust co-op, similar to what they did, and they want me to be on this thing. We're going to be on for 6 or 7 hours. And of course, I asked them, well, why do y'all want me to do it? Well, we want you to facilitate. What for? I said, my granddaughter says I'm 4 years old in baseball. Why you need me? But, well, you know what, you've done it, this and that. So it's learning that. And I learn something new every day. Understand that. As I told people, my grandmother used to say, boy, you don't know it all, you never will. Learn something new every day. And I told this little joke the other day. I was on the advisory committee of the United States Conference of Mayors. And only 5 mayors in the whole country are on the advisory committee, some 900 and some mayors. 98% of them were white men. And in those days, when I was in office, they used to be smoking them big old cigars and stuff. And this one guy was up talking one day and talking. And Doug Frazier was an ex-officio member. He was head of the United Auto Workers. And this guy, after about 40, 50 minutes talking, Doug Frazier said, hey, wait a minute, can I cut you off? Yeah, what you want? He said, you've been talking for 40 minutes now. I'm well educated. I don't understand a damn thing you said. He said, look, let me tell you a story. He said there was a story about this airplane flying from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. In that plane was President Nixon, Vice President Agnew, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, an old priest, and a young hippie. When that plane got over Denver, the pilot radioed back and said, we're having engine trouble, and the plane's going to go down. And there are 5 of you, but only 4 parachutes. So you have to take a democratic choice who should be saved. But Nixon said, I'm leader of the free world. I should be saved at all costs. He grabbed the parachute and jumped. Agnew said, well, Tricky Dick forgot all about Watergate. I may have to replace him. Agnew forgot about his own tax scam. He grabbed the parachute and jumped. Kissinger said, I'm far and away the smartest man in the whole wide world. Middle East subtle diplomacy, et cetera, et cetera. I should be saved. He grabbed the parachute and jumped. The priest turned to the young hippie and said, young man, I'm 90 plus years old. I've lived my life. You take the final parachute. Hippie said, no, father. Remember the man said he's the smartest man in the whole wide world? He said, yes. He grabbed my backpack. So you see, the nature of that story is don't pay attention to them to claim they know it all. Let's learn from one another, from a real educated process. And that's what it is. It's constant learning and engaging people, because people in communities know what they need. The thing is, we don't give them any voice to help with the development of what communities should be. And the church has to play a role. The church played a much better role when I was a kid than it is nowadays. And I would hope that we get back to that. But a combination of those things is what is going to make that beloved community the kind of society that will allow. I mean, right now, it's terrible what Putin is doing to Ukraine. But it's also terrible that we spent over $50 billion of weapons rather than NATO negotiating a peaceful settlement to stop that war, because it could lead to the next world war, this, that. But Americans think that, and Biden just doing it because it's time for re-election. But all those billions of dollars, and we can't do something to fix up our schools, can't pay teachers a decent salary, can't do the kinds of things you should do, can't create a workable economy, and just things like that. There's so much we need to do and need to learn. But it needs to come from the eyes and the vision of the people, and the church has to play a major role.
Speaking of giving voice, there's some here that probably want to give voice to questions that are burning with them within the next couple of minutes that we have. So, if there are any questions from the audience, we would like to give you an opportunity to ask that burning question.
I didn't mean to put you all to sleep.
Gave a lot of food for thought on exactly how to maneuver how we can create beloved community, and that has been because we are facing not only affordable housing issues here in Nashville, but now we are facing building a $1 billion domed stadium
Yeah.
facility in the midst of
There's a
having.
guy named Rich Lapchick who's a professor. His father was one of the greatest basketball coaches this country's ever known. And I got to know him very well in Boston when he was at Northeastern. He's at some university in California now. But he's written chapters on top of chapters of why cities should not build those stadiums. Because the cost is on the back of the taxpayer. It doesn't get paid for by the team and the campus or whatever else. And Oakland's going through the same kind of thing right now, but you have to study it and see. They will tell you that the team owners are going to pay for this. But boy, when you look up your tax bill after it gets billed and that's that, your charges there and whatever. And I mean, for years in Oakland, when the Raiders came back from California, it was put on the tax rolls, and people are still paying it. But the Raiders are now in Las Vegas, things like that. But we just don't know. It's what we don't know. And politicians get paid under the table so they'll say yes to this, whatever else. I'll never forget when I was in office, there were people who wanted to do developments, and they come to see me, and before they left, they'd put an envelope on the desk full of $100 bills. And all I said, Lord, if I was to accept that, my mama and grandmama would fall out the sky and whip me with that nightstick and whatever. But that's what it is. We don't know how people are acting in our behalf. We have to learn together that which is right. I mean, sure, it's always nice to have a good stadium, but should a multi-billion-dollar stadium take place before better schools and affordable housing and things like that? Should it be paid for by the, or should it be made for by the people that's making the money off of those baseball teams, et cetera, whatever else? Think, folks. We got to think. We got to learn to think. We got to be to analyze, and I would hope that our universities and places begin to play a better role to begin teaching and making sure that people become more and more aware of that.
In the last couple of minutes that I have with you, since no one else jumped out, was there a jump in the water? Since there's not another. Oh, come on, Justin, come on.
And I think it's an important story that you shared. I come from the same part of the country that you are located in, and kind of talk about the anti-apartheid movement you led when you were mayor there. I grew up hearing those stories of shutting the port down, and you refusing to unload anything from South Africa, and just kind of see how you use your local, acting locally, but thinking globally and thinking internationally and looking at international solidarity. Can you talk a little bit about that story?
Well, as I said, I grew up in Rochester, New York. From a child up, I attended Mount Olive Baptist Church. My minister was Charles Body, who came out here to be the head of American Baptists after that. Body used to take several young fellows, myself, across the state of New York on debate teams to talk with other youngsters about some of the problems and things. But there were a lot of students at Colgate Divinity, which was a seminary there in Rochester, from South Africa. And during the Civil Rights Movement, we didn't get paid. We had regular jobs so we could put food on the family table. We sit up all night strategizing. We also didn't have computers and all that stuff, so we weren't writing. So history that should have been written was not written by us. But these young students from South Africa would really tell us about what that apartheid system was about, et cetera, whatever. And we were comparing, the two things. So we got very much involved in the anti-apartheid movement. When I end up at Berkeley working first for the city, I worked for the city for a while, then I went back to the Department of Labor because the governor at that time, Jerry Brown, had legislated that 25% of all non-traditional jobs should go to women. Carpentry, electricians, and all that. And they hired me back to the Department of Labor to go and fight the labor trade unions on it. And I'll tell you, it was the worst experience I ever had because men were feared of women getting their jobs. I mean, they would cuss at them, they would hit them in the head with a hammer and things like that, something else that history has never told. But of course, we were all talking about divestment from South Africa too. And Danny Glover, who first started out working in model cities before he ever went to acting school and stuff, and was very much active. He was very active in the apartheid movement. He and Harry Belafonte. And after I got nominated to run for office, the first day, they're doing a fundraiser for me, and who walks in the door? Harry Belafonte, who I'd never met. He said, I ain't never met you, brother, but I know your background, and I'm here to campaign for you. Jane Fonda, who was very active, we used to call her Hanoi Jane, came and raised money. So we got very active, and we passed. We were the first city in the country to pass outlawing apartheid movement. We had to call on the Methodist Church because they had already done it, and they taught us how to create the legal standards and all that and whatever else. And after, when I went to the Conference of Mayors, because they could never get the Conference of Mayors to pass it, I was asked to go to the floor and speak on divestment. And I did. And I was nervous because it was my first time speaking before all these high-class people, you understand. The next morning, I'm coming downstairs, and I get to the mezzanine where they're serving breakfast and stuff. And people are walking up congratulating me. So I go to the office and say, why am I getting all these congratulations? Gus, it usually takes years to get voted to the advisory committee of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Marion Barry holds the party last night after that great talk you gave, and the mayors voted against apartheid, and he held a party and nominated you to the advisory committee of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And I said, oh my God. So it's just learning and things like that, but it was something that was in our blood then. I mean, we knew about what that whole system was. And of course, I had gone to Angola again later in the 80s when I was with the World Peace Council, when South Africa was attacking Angola. In the southern provinces, they defeated South Africa, but our media never picked it up. I was flown back to New York to speak before the United Nations because the president, Ramesh Chandra from India, we were together, but he wasn't feeling too well. And I went to the General Assembly and spoke about what was happening. That's when it became known in the United States that the RAND in South Africa had slipped 50%, and that's when apartheid began to be on its way out. And the ANC, African National Congress, made me an honorary member. When Nelson Mandela came to the United States after he got out of prison, I was his escort for a couple of days. He was still at Winnie Mandela. So it's just experiences like that, Like I say, I'm just an old country boy, just being in the right place at the right place, I guess at the wrong time, right time or something. I don't know. What I tell you, God's love and whomever, but thank goodness for my mother and grandmother.
Well, if there are no other questions, I'll close out with this last question. You've participated in a lot of justice programming and projects. Which would you say are either your most memorable or the one that you're most proud of?
Well, certainly divestiture of South Africa, but also the Dudley Street neighborhood initiative where a community got eminent domain authority. Because the people did it, and the churches all played a role. It was just everybody. And the universities all came to me, Harvard, some of the great ones, MIT, this, that. Because we got all this information, and women went door to door and got all this information. Then we took this information to create GIS maps to educate everybody from business people to government to schools to children, etc. I remember something as simple as this one time. Women are always concerned about the nature of children. They went to the elementary school, and all the kids had scars and scratches on their legs. So they went and looked around, and the schoolyard was made of cement. They went to the principal and said, "Y'all dig up that cement and put sand in them yards." Month later, no more scars. Something as simple as that. But women came up with that idea. Not these great men who knew structured development, etc., but just thinking from the standpoint of the child, things as simple as that. So it's taking a little kind of thing. We created this GIS map to educate everybody, but then what we also did, we upgraded the quality in our schools. 90-something% of the kids started graduating from high school and getting college scholarships to Dartmouth, to Harvard, all these schools, etc., whatever else. These kids, and what do? Usually when young people get educated, they leave. They don't move back. They move back and help to rebuild this whole neighborhood. And many of them are living there now. John, I forget his last name now. He was a director after I was. He'd been one of the young people who had been jailed for problems. But why are so many young black men in jail? Because the way our communities were in the communities I was in, the way police would knock you in the head. But I'll tell you something, and I believe in nonviolence, so don't let this story bother you. We used to walk the streets of Rochester when I was 10, 11 years old, and there was a police there named Kelly. And Kelly would walk the streets, and he'd see you, bop, hit you in the head, and knock you off the street. So fellas got tired of it and had a little discussion one day. And off this main street, Clarissa Street, there were a lot of alleys. So one night, they put together a plan. And the fellows went up on the roofs of all these garages in the alley with baskets of bricks. And they had a young woman go up there and holler, "Help, help!" And here come old Kelly. And when he came in there, they threw all them rocks down there. Now, when he crawled out of there, he didn't come back to work for 6 months with a bad limp. But I want you to know one thing. When he got well again, he was the nicest police on the beat that you ever saw. Now, our minister, now don't y'all do that no more. we didn't. But it's after a while, you get fed up with certain things that just shouldn't be because, we live in what I call a prison industrial complex, which is still slave labor. Most Americans don't understand that. Or a military industrial complex, where the capitalists are making millions and millions of dollars off those bombs and drones. But we send it to Ukraine right now rather than having NATO negotiate a peaceful solution. We don't know. We don't understand it. And my God, the churches and others got to take the forefront to lead to explain this stuff to us. The academies got to, and whatever else. Because so many young men in the communities I came out of were going to prison with. My cousin had an IQ of 186. He started going to prison when he was 13 years old. And just didn't make sense. He was the most intelligent, brilliant guy. And I used to go into prison sometime to talk about community development stuff after I'd gotten up on my feet and did Dudley Street and whatever else. And I went into the prison in Niagara Falls one time after speaking at a Catholic university. And all the prisoners had a copy of the book, Streets of Hope, about Dudley Street, and wanted me to autograph it. I had the greatest discussion I ever had with them. And when I finished, I said, "You know what? You fellows," these were black and white men in prison, "ought to be in the White House, and most people in the White House ought to be in these prisons." And it's just We got to turn things around, y'all.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Do you have a couple of books that you would recommend that you think would be inspirational for people trying to learn more about cultivating community and building community?
Well, as I said, Streets of Hope is a good one by Peter Medoff and Holly Sklar.
And do you have any plans to write a memoir?
Yeah, Damien Durr and that woman Janet, they're on my back right now. They're forcing me to write a book. Yeah.
There is the Gus Newport project is
right.
happening now.
Yeah.
Please go to the gusnewport.org.
There's a
.com, thegusnewport.com, and find out more information about the Gus Newport project that is ongoing and happening right now. It's a great question.
See, I'm from the old school. Oh, I thought I had this with me. No, I have a video or something, but called Gaining Ground. That was done by a woman named Leah Mahan. That tells all about Dudley Street.
On the same token, is there a curriculum mapping blueprint of what happened in Dudley Street so that it can be reproduced in other neighborhoods?
Yeah, because you know, the first time I came to Nashville, I was invited here after the National Council of Elders meeting. I'd gotten an award in Lexington, Kentucky, for work that I'd done with Community Land Trust. And so I drove here. And back then, as I'm driving in, I see all these cranes in the sky. And I knew right away it was gentrification to the highest degree. I didn't even have to be in town head and talk to anybody. I could see it because I know what those things do. And it's all over now. I mean, my God, it's just unbelievable. And what establishments have what limitations? What is your big university here?
Fisk University?
No. You know,
okay, we'll say
say?
there's a Vanderbilt. There is
Vanderbilt.
There is Tennessee State University. There's a Belmont.
But I'm
there's
saying Vanderbilt because you see Vanderbilt been all over the place and constantly expanding. But Vanderbilt and Belmont just constantly growing. I mean, where's their limitation?
They're private institutions. So private institutions, especially white private institutions, have a little more leeway than these public institutions do, like the HBCUs. It would have been great if the HBCUs could have expanded in North Nashville, but political measures.
But you know, community benefits and legislation can halt that if they want to, if they weren't being paid under the table or something by them private institutions. We did it in Berkeley. We stopped it.
I'm going to say that it's not about Nashville. I think the leadership here didn't push back. Nashville's not as progressive and fast forward moving as Berkeley or Atlanta or Chicago. So saying the community they should push for move.
Well, all we can hope for someday. Change has got to come.
Keith got to jump in now.
We have legislator Harold Blood, who got Tennessee State. How many millions had they held up? 500 million. Right? And so this is from the state board of regents that they gave to UT and withheld from us, and also all these other white colleges. So like there've always been efforts being made, but then they did a metro government and put 40 council people so that representation would be cut. So I'm a native Nashvilleian and I'm former president of NAACP. So there are some people who've really been trying to push, but you don't get enough. We got people like Jessica Jones, who's running, about to get elected, I think already, that are also doing significant work. But it's piecemeal, right? And a lot of it is in starts and fits because we get spent. I did a living wage campaign against Vanderbilt about 15 years ago. We asked Jim Lawson to come in and help advise us, and we won that campaign. They had $4 billion endowment. We had 76,000. We went to the workers' homes and talked to them and got a memorandum of understanding and voted for that to happen. So it is things like that happening.
But it doesn't stay in place forever. That's the sad thing about politics. every time a new group comes in,
It's
it changes. That's why eminent domain made the difference for the project we did in Dudley Street, because that's into perpetuity, which is 99 years. But we have to know all those things. You're right, because and who better than Jim Lawson, with his background?
And you both are on the council of elders.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jim was one of the founding members. He and Phil, Phil was this young man's mentor. Jim's brother, Phil, and Vincent Harding.
Jump in, Justin.
That's a generational question as well, because I think this is something I talked to Diane Nash about here, particularly being in Nashville as someone who's younger, even in this room. But like when you were organizing these things, Dudley Street, when you were organizing with Malcolm, you were younger as well. Did you deal with territorialism, or even because one thing I think that's been a hindrance here is that everyone wants to be the HNIC, everyone wants to be there when the camera's there, but they're not willing to. Number one, they're not willing to uplift young people. It's very territorial. We have groups here who I'm not going to name, but there's a lot of ego. There's a lot of plantation politics. There's a lot of division even within our own community. And so how do we deal with that, and did you deal with that in your movements?
First of all, like I say, I am so grateful to have been raised by my grandmother. But I can tell you, the nicest brother, not like the media reflects him, who had that kind of vision was Malcolm X. Malcolm was as broad-minded and brilliant, as intelligent as anybody I have ever known in the world. And they meant to get rid of that brother, believe me, because, a lot of the brothers in the Nation of Islam were formerly incarcerated. Malcolm got them up, cleaned them up. Malcolm also taught all the brothers, love and protect thy women, this and that. And a lot of things I saw happen. I remember after Malcolm got killed, and Betty was pregnant with the twins. I took her to the hospital and she delivered them. But she wanted to meet Nina Simone, so I took her downtown to meet Nina Simone because I knew Nina, because we put Nina up when I was mayor of Berkeley. She had a nervous breakdown. Turned out they lived only 2 blocks away from each other. Then Nina and her daughter and Malcolm's second daughter moved to Paris, and they got to be real good friends. But a woman named Flo Kennedy, who was an attorney, a black attorney, female attorney, in New York, used to always wear cowboy hats, this and that, put together a group of women to help get Betty Shabazz back on her feet. Because of the Nation of Islam, women were not allowed to do it. They had to wear long dresses and this and that, blah, blah, and everything. So she hadn't even done her own shopping and stuff. I ended up doing a lot. I ended up painting her house. She had this wallpaper on the wall of this house that we bought for. We raised money. And the money was raised at Sidney Poitier's place. Some of the great jazz musicians, Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, Max Roach, all came and Billy Howell all raised money for this thing. Betty didn't like this wallpaper because it had velvet in it. I had to steam all that wallpaper. It was the hardest job I ever had. But what Flo Kennedy did, she got Betty back on her feet. Soon after she delivered those kids, she applied to Massachusetts, I think the University at Amherst. She went and got her PhD after that and became a leading professor at Malcolm X University in Brooklyn and things like that. To get back up on her feet with 6 kids by herself in this and that. All these women, coming to her aid and helping her in this and that, and Flo Kennedy and that. But see, does America ever write about those kinds of things? Maybe I should shut up because I haven't written about it.
The thing that I do hear through every story, every comment that you've made, that it has been a collaborative effort of not just individuals, but organizations, institutions, churches, all coming together for the good of the community.
Right.
That is not one organization that's standing out. It's not one individual that is standing out. It's not one church that is standing out. That it takes a collaborative effort, all of us with a common goal, working for the same. That if there's going to be a change in gentrification, if there's going to be a change in affordable housing, then it's going to take a collective, so to speak, In other words, we've got to organize the cooperative.
Right.
That it's going to take us organizing that cooperative to make that difference. And so I guess it's going to take those that are in this room and those that are watching and those that feel that burden in their hearts and in their spirits to call together others to make a change. And we hope that you will most certainly consider doing that, and consider doing that at a place called Scarrett Bennett. That we have spaces here for collaboration, to get together, to do a think tank, to map it out, to come together and let's reason together for the good of the community. For it is up to us to make sure that we are the ones that are eradicating racism. That it is up to us to make sure that we are the ones that are making sure that there's that transformative educational piece. That it is indeed up to us to make sure that, yes, we have that spiritual background, but we need to use it in a way that we recognize all humankind as humankind and be kind to all humans. It is up to us to not only do transformative education and racial justice and transformative education, but it's also up to us to make sure we uplift the women. Because as we've heard tonight, that it has indeed been the women that will point out and bring together what needs to happen in community. So we hope to bring you even more conversations like this here at Scarrett Bennett, for you to reason together, to dialogue together, to let's strategize together to make sure that we are offering radical hospitality to all that are in our midst. So we invite you to come on over to Scarrett Bennett Center, 1027 18th Avenue South. Visit us on the website for various opportunities to engage with us. Yes, we've been hosted by TT and Company that has curated some tea. So you can grab that here at Scarrett as well. There are a couple of things that are coming through next week. We will consider this conversation with showing the documentary by Oprah Winfrey on Tuesday. The Color of Care with the Tennessee Justice Center. So we will have that documentary showing on Tuesday, October the 25th. Yes, the Color of Care documentary. And then we'll close out the month with domestic violence. And then in November, we have Mendoza here for us to have a conversation around Latina X. So please be in the place, whether it is indeed in person or virtual. We have space, we have room for you here at Scarrett Bennett Center. This has indeed been a pleasure. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you all. Thank you all. And thank you all, audience, live and virtual. Thank you so much.